The first time I asked my parents for help, I stood in my kitchen staring at the sink full of bottles that still needed to be sterilized. One baby had finally fallen asleep in the bassinet. The other was crying in the swing. I hadn't showered in 2 days. My hands were shaking from exhaustion. I didn't want money. I didn't want anything big. I just needed someone to come over for a few hours so I could sleep without fear that one of the boys would stop breathing. When my mom answered the phone, she sounded distracted. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained that Ethan had picked up extra shifts because of the medical bills and I was alone most nights. I asked if she and Dad could come by the next day, even just for the afternoon. There was a pause. Then she sighed. "Hannah, we can't drop everything every time you feel overwhelmed," she said. "You chose to have kids." I felt my face burn. I told her I wasn't asking them to drop everything. I just needed help for a little while. She said they had commitments. Important ones. My dad got on the phone and said, "You need to learn how to manage. Parenting isn't supposed to be easy." I hung up and just stood there, holding the phone. One of the babies started crying again, louder this time. I picked him up and tried not to cry with him. Later that week, I found out what those important commitments were. My sister Alyssa was opening a boutique downtown, and my parents were spending almost every day helping her set it up. They were painting walls, organizing shelves, meeting with contractors. My mom posted photos in the family group chat of them smiling in front of the storefront, talking about how proud they were. I stared at those pictures at 2 a.m. while rocking a baby with colic. It wasn't just that they wouldn't help me. It was that they had energy, time, and money. Just not for me. A few days later, I stopped by their house because I needed to return a dish. I didn't plan to stay. When I walked in, I saw shopping bags on the table with new decor items for the boutique. My mom was excitedly talking about the grand opening. My dad barely looked up when I came in with one of the twins in his car seat. "Oh, we're heading out soon," my mom said quickly. "We're meeting Alyssa at the store." She didn't even ask how I was doing. I stood there for a second, waiting for someone to notice the dark circles under my eyes. Waiting for someone to say, "Let me hold him." No one did. That was the moment I understood something clearly. I wasn't overwhelmed because I was weak. I was overwhelmed because I was alone. And the people who promised they would always show up had already decided I wasn't their priority. A week after that visit, things got worse at home. One of the boys had a follow-up appointment because of his lungs, and the copay alone made my stomach drop. My maternity leave was unpaid, and every bill that came in felt heavier than the last. Ethan tried to stay strong, but I could see the pressure on his face when he sat at the table late at night going over numbers. One evening, after both babies cried for nearly an hour straight, I locked myself in the bathroom and called my mom again. I wasn't calm this time. My voice cracked. I told her I was exhausted. I told her I felt like I was failing. I said I didn't know how much longer I could keep doing this without some kind of break. She didn't soften. "We already raised our kids," she said firmly. "It's your turn now." I swallowed and said I wasn't asking them to raise my children. I just needed help once in a while. Even one day a week. She repeated that they had plans and that they deserved to enjoy their retirement. My dad's voice came in through the speaker, agreeing with her. He said they had worked hard their whole lives and weren't going to spend their free time changing diapers again. After the call ended, I felt small. Not angry. Just small. A few days later, I ran into one of my mom's friends at the grocery store. She smiled and asked how the twins were doing. Then she mentioned how generous my parents were being with Alyssa's new business. She said they were investing a large amount of money to help her get started and had even co-signed part of the lease. I stood there pretending to be happy for my sister. That same weekend, Alyssa went on a short trip with friends to celebrate the store opening. My parents stayed at her apartment to watch her golden retriever. I know this because my mom told me proudly over the phone. She said the dog was so much work but worth it. I didn't respond right away. I was holding one baby while the other cried in his crib. I looked around at the laundry that hadn't been folded and the unopened hospital statement on the counter. They had time to dog sit. They had money to invest. They had energy to support a business. But when it came to their own daughter, who was struggling to recover physically and emotionally while caring for two fragile babies, they suddenly had nothing left to give. This wasn't the first time Alyssa had come first. I had seen it my whole life. But this time it wasn't about attention or praise. This time it felt like abandonment. And that realization hurt more than the sleepless nights ever could. Looking back, I think I always knew where I stood in my family. Growing up, Alyssa was the center of everything. She was outgoing, confident, and naturally charming. In high school, she was a cheerleader. My parents never missed a single game. My mom helped organize team dinners. My dad bragged about her to anyone who would listen. I was different. I liked books more than parties. I spent most of my time studying or helping around the house. I got straight A's without being asked. Teachers praised me at conferences. My parents would nod and say, "That's just Hannah. She's easy. Easy. Low maintenance. Independent." At first, I thought those were compliments. When I got accepted into a good college, I was proud. I worked hard for it. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table with my acceptance letter in my hands, waiting for my parents to say they were proud of me. They were happy, but the conversation quickly turned practical. Tuition was expensive. My dad said student loans would be good for me. "It builds character," he said. "You'll appreciate your education more." I didn't argue. I filled out the loan forms myself. A year later, Alyssa decided she needed a break from school. She said she wanted to move to California to find herself. My parents helped her pack. They paid her rent. They covered her credit card bills when she went over budget. They told everyone how brave she was for chasing her dreams. I watched from the sidelines and told myself not to compare. Whenever I achieved something, it was expected. When Alyssa did something average, it was celebrated. If I handled a problem on my own, it was because I was strong. If she struggled, it was because she needed extra support. I became the one who never asked for help. The one who solved things quietly. The one who didn't cause stress. Over time, I stopped expecting fairness. I convinced myself that being responsible was enough. That I didn't need the extra attention or financial help. I built my life step by step without leaning on them. But becoming a mother changed something inside me. When my sons were born, I didn't see myself as the easy child anymore. I saw two tiny human beings who depended on me for everything. And for the first time, I wasn't asking for praise or money. I was asking for basic support. I never imagined that even then, when it involved their own grandsons, the old pattern would stay exactly the same. It was 3:17 in the morning when everything felt like it was falling apart. Both babies were crying at the same time. Not soft whimpers, but loud, sharp cries that filled the whole house. One needed to be fed. The other had a fever and wouldn't settle down no matter how long I rocked him. Ethan was at work, covering a night shift at the hospital, and I was alone. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time I closed my eyes, one of them needed something. My body ached. My head hurt. I felt dizzy from being so tired. I sat on the floor between their cribs and tried to calm them both at once. My hands were shaking. I felt tears running down my face, but I didn't even remember starting to cry. Without thinking too much, I grabbed my phone and called my mom. It rang and rang. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I just stared at the screen until it went dark. The rest of the night passed slowly. By morning, the house was quiet, but I felt empty. Not angry. Just drained. Later that day, I needed to get out of the house for a few minutes. I packed the boys into the car and drove with no real plan. Somehow, I ended up near my parents' neighborhood. I don't know why. Maybe I still hoped they would surprise me. As I drove past their house, I saw cars parked along the curb. Their front yard was decorated with balloons. A large white banner stretched across the lawn. I slowed down enough to read it. Alyssa's dream finally comes true. Music was playing. I could see my parents in the yard, smiling and laughing with Alyssa. My mom was hugging her. My dad was holding a tray of drinks. Everyone looked happy and proud. For a second, I just stared. No one looked tired. No one looked overwhelmed. They had time and energy for this. They were celebrating like nothing else in the world mattered. I pulled over across the street and sat there in silence. The babies were asleep in the back seat. I watched my family through the windshield like I was watching strangers. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just sadness. It was clarity. I realized I had been waiting for them to change. Waiting for them to notice I was struggling. Waiting for them to choose me. Sitting there in that car, I understood something simple and painful. They weren't coming. And for the first time, I stopped hoping they would. A few days after that, there was a knock on my door in the middle of the afternoon. I almost didn't answer it because both babies had finally fallen asleep. I thought it might be a delivery truck or someone selling something. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Grandpa Walter standing there. He was holding 2 large grocery bags in one hand and a pack of diapers under his arm. He looked smaller than I remembered, but steady. Calm. I figured you might need a hand, he said softly. I didn't know what to say at first. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the kitchen and gently set everything down on the counter. He had brought milk, bread, fruit, soup, baby wipes, and formula. Things we actually needed. He didn't make a big speech. He didn't ask 100 questions. He just looked around quietly, taking in the bottles drying on the rack and the blankets folded on the couch. One of the boys started fussing, and I moved quickly to pick him up. Grandpa followed me into the living room. He watched the way I held the baby and tried to calm him. You look tired, he said. It wasn't judgment. It was concern. I nodded. I didn't try to pretend I was fine. For some reason, it felt easier to be honest with him. I told him how hard it had been. I told him about the hospital bills and Ethan's long shifts. I told him how I felt like I was barely keeping everything together. He listened without interrupting. After a few minutes, he asked a simple question. Have your parents been helping much? I hesitated. I didn't want to speak badly about them. But I was too tired to lie. No, I said quietly. He frowned slightly, like he didn't understand. Not at all? I shook my head. I explained that they were busy and had other priorities. I didn't go into every detail. I didn't need to. The look on his face changed as he put the pieces together. His jaw tightened. The softness in his eyes turned into something firmer. They live close, he said slowly. Yes. And they know how much you're dealing with? Yes. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at his great-grandson in my arms. Then he reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Family shows up, he said finally. There was no anger in his voice, but there was disappointment. Deep disappointment. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. Someone had noticed. That Sunday, Grandpa Walter invited all of us to his house for dinner. He said it had been too long since the whole family sat at one table. Ethan and I almost didn't go because getting the twins ready for an evening out was exhausting, but Grandpa insisted. He even said he would make it simple and early so we wouldn't be out late. When we arrived, my parents were already there. Alyssa was sitting at the table talking about new suppliers for her store. The house smelled like roast chicken and fresh bread. Everything looked calm, normal, like nothing in our family was wrong. We sat down to eat. Grandpa asked about the babies and how they were growing. Ethan answered politely. I focused on cutting my food into small pieces while keeping one eye on the baby monitor beside me. In the middle of dinner, Grandpa cleared his throat. So, he said, looking around the table, how often have you two been helping with the twins? He looked directly at my parents. My mom gave a small laugh. Oh, you know how independent Hannah is, she said lightly. She likes to handle things herself. I kept my eyes on my plate. I didn't want to argue in front of everyone. I didn't want another scene. But Grandpa didn't smile. He turned to my dad. And you? How often do you go over there? My dad shifted in his chair. They've got it under control, he said. We don't want to interfere. Grandpa's voice stayed calm. That's not what I asked. The room felt tense. Alyssa stopped talking. Ethan sat very still beside me. Finally, my mom spoke again, more quietly this time. We've been busy. With the store and everything. So you haven't babysat? Grandpa asked. Silence. No, my dad admitted. No meals dropped off? Grandpa continued. Another pause. No. No help with expenses? He asked. My mom shook her head. The truth hung in the air. No one tried to explain it away this time. No one made excuses about independence or space. Grandpa leaned back in his chair. His face didn't show anger, but it showed something heavier. Disappointment. The kind that settles deep. Dinner ended early after that. The conversation never fully recovered. As we were getting ready to leave, Grandpa asked me to step outside with him for a moment. The air was cool, and the yard was quiet. He looked at me carefully. You didn't ask me for anything, he said. I didn't want to cause trouble, I replied. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that stayed with me. I raised my son better than this. Or at least, I thought I did. There was regret in his voice. Not toward me, but toward his own child. For the first time, it felt like someone was holding my parents accountable. And I didn't have to say a word. There was something I didn't know at the time. Grandpa Walter owned more than just the small house he lived in. He still held the deed to the family lake house, the one we used to visit every summer when I was a child. It sat on quiet land by the water, with a long wooden dock and tall trees that made the air feel cooler even in July. My parents had always talked about it like it would one day be theirs. Over the years, I had heard them mention future plans. They wanted to remodel the kitchen. Tear down the old deck and build a larger one. My mom once joked about turning one of the upstairs rooms into a craft space when we finally take over. They spoke about it with confidence, like it was already decided. What I also didn't fully understand was that Grandpa had built a strong investment portfolio during his working years. He had been careful with money. He lived simply, but he invested wisely. My parents knew this. They assumed that everything would eventually pass down to them. But Grandpa was not careless. He paid attention. He noticed who called him just to check in. He noticed who visited when he didn't ask. He noticed who only brought up the lake house when repairs were needed or taxes were due. He listened more than he spoke. After that Sunday dinner, something changed in him. He didn't announce it. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply made an appointment with his attorney. He sat in a quiet office and went through documents line by line. He asked careful questions. He made specific decisions. He rewrote his will. He adjusted who would control what. He set up protections and conditions. He made sure everything was clear and legal. There was no anger in the process. Just calm thought. He believed that family was about responsibility. About showing up when it mattered. Not about assuming rewards at the end. He never told my parents he was making changes. He didn't argue with them. He didn't warn them. He simply made his choices quietly. At the time, I had no idea any of this was happening. I was focused on feeding schedules and doctor visits. I wasn't thinking about property or inheritance. I wasn't expecting anything from anyone. But while I was learning how to survive on little sleep, Grandpa was watching everything closely. He wasn't just seeing who needed help. He was seeing who deserved trust. And without telling anyone, he made sure his final decisions would reflect exactly what he had witnessed. About a month later, Grandpa Walter called everyone and said he wanted the whole family at his house for dinner again. His voice on the phone was calm but firm. He said it was important and that no one should make other plans. When we arrived, the mood felt different from the start. The table was set neatly. There were folders placed near Grandpa's seat. My parents looked relaxed. My mom even seemed cheerful. Alyssa sat close to Dad, whispering something and smiling. After we finished eating, Grandpa didn't waste time. He folded his hands on the table and looked around at each of us. "I've updated my estate plan," he said clearly. "I believe in being transparent, so there are no surprises later." My mom smiled confidently, like she already knew what was coming. Alyssa reached over and squeezed Dad's hand under the table. Grandpa continued speaking in the same steady tone. "The lake house means a lot to this family," he said. "It holds memories. It represents hard work and responsibility." Everyone was listening closely now. "I've decided the lake house will go to someone who understands family responsibility." There was a small pause. My parents sat a little straighter. Then Grandpa turned his head and looked directly at me. "I'm placing it in a trust," he said, "for Noah and Liam." For a second, no one reacted. The room went completely silent. Then my mom's smile disappeared. "What?" she said sharply. Alyssa gasped. "Dad, that doesn't make sense," she said, looking at my father. My dad leaned forward. "Are you serious?" he asked Grandpa. "Why would you skip us?" Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. "I'm serious," he said calmly. "The trust will protect the property until the boys are older. It will be managed properly. It will stay in the family." My mom shook her head. "This is sudden. We've always talked about taking care of that house." Grandpa met her eyes. Talking about taking care of something and actually taking care of people are two different things. The words landed heavily. Dad's face turned red. "So this is punishment?" he asked. "No," Grandpa replied. "This is a decision." Alyssa crossed her arms. "We've been here for you," she said defensively. Grandpa looked at her, then back at my parents. "Legacy isn't about who demands it," he said quietly. "It's about who deserves it." No one had an answer for that. I sat frozen in my chair. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't expected it. My hands were trembling under the table. The room felt smaller, tighter. My parents looked shocked, like something they had always counted on was suddenly gone. Grandpa simply closed the folder in front of him. The decision was final. The tension in the room didn't disappear after Grandpa closed the folder. If anything, it grew heavier. My mom's face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. My dad's jaw was tight, and Alyssa looked like she wanted to disappear. My mom was the first to speak. "You manipulated him, Hannah," she said sharply. "You got him to take the house away from us." I blinked. I hadn't said a word, and yet she was blaming me. I wanted to argue, to scream, to tell her how wrong she was. But something inside me stayed quiet. Alyssa jumped in. "I need that money more than anyone," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. "You're taking what should have helped me." Dad slammed his hand lightly on the table. "You're ungrateful, Hannah," he snapped. "After everything, you turn on us like this?" I took a deep breath and met their eyes calmly. For the first time, I felt a strength I didn't know I had. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to beg for fairness. I just spoke slowly and clearly. I didn't ask Grandpa for anything, I said. I just asked you for help. The words landed in the room like a weight. My mom's mouth opened and closed like she didn't know what to say. Alyssa's hand fell from my dad's arm, and her eyes widened. Dad's fists unclenched slowly, and for a moment, he looked at me without the usual anger or frustration. No one could argue with that truth. None of the insults they had thrown at me could erase it. I hadn't taken anything that wasn't already meant for me. I hadn't schemed. I hadn't demanded. I had only asked for the support that any parent should give to their child, and they had refused. The room was quiet after that. Grandpa watched from his chair, calm but firm, letting them feel the reality of their choices. I could see it in their faces, they had been wrong. They had turned away when it mattered most, and now, there was nothing they could say to fix it. I realized something important in that moment. For years, I had tried to earn their love and approval. I had tried to be the perfect daughter, the responsible one, the one who never complained. I had believed that if I worked hard and stayed quiet, they would notice and support me. Now I understood that wasn't necessary. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their recognition. I had my husband, my twins, and the quiet support of someone who truly understood, Grandpa. That was enough. I looked around the table one last time, keeping my voice steady. I've done my best. That's all anyone can ask. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to defend myself any further. The truth spoke louder than any argument, and finally, my parents had nothing left to say. A few weeks after the family dinner, Grandpa Walter stopped by our house again. This time, he didn't bring groceries or diapers. He just came to visit. I was feeding Noah while Liam fussed in his swing, and Ethan was cooking dinner at the stove. The kitchen was a mess, toys scattered across the floor, baby bottles drying on the counter. The smell of dinner mixed with baby powder hung in the air. Grandpa sat quietly at the table, watching everything. He didn't comment on the mess. He didn't offer advice. He just observed. He smiled gently as he saw me switch the babies between my arms, humming softly to calm them. He nodded once at Ethan when he dropped a pan on the stove and quickly wiped the steam from his glasses. After a few minutes, he leaned back and said quietly, "You didn't need rescuing. You just needed to see who shows up." I paused, looking at him, and realized how true it was. All the struggles, all the sleepless nights, all the times I had felt abandoned, it had led to this. To clarity. To understanding. I had spent so long hoping my parents would act differently, but in the end, I didn't need them to change. I just needed someone to notice who really cared. That's when it hit me, the real victory wasn't about what Grandpa had done with the lake house or the investments. The real revenge, the real justice, was in building a life where I didn't have to beg for love, attention, or support. I had my husband. I had my babies. I had Grandpa, who had quietly been there all along. That was worth more than any inheritance or family approval. I thought about my parents. They had believed that withholding help would teach me a lesson, make me struggle, maybe even break me. Instead, it had only shown me who mattered, and it had revealed their true priorities. Their choices had cost them something far more valuable than money or property. They had lost respect, and their legacy had been quietly redirected to the ones who deserved it most. As I rocked Noah in my arms and soothed Liam in the swing, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Life was chaotic and loud, but it was ours. I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt capable. I felt strong. I felt loved by the people who mattered most. Grandpa's reaction stayed with me. He didn't make a scene. He didn't lecture or scold. He simply showed up, quietly, without fanfare. His presence spoke louder than any argument or confrontation ever could. That quiet justice reminded me that sometimes, betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes, it just redirects the blessings to the people who truly value them. And in that moment, holding both my sons close, I understood something important. Life isn't about waiting for everyone else to show up. It's about building your own world with the people who will. And that is the kind of justice that lasts forever.